Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite movie of every single year that I've been alive, which in this case obviously goes back to the year 2002. Last night I did a video talking about my favorite games of every year, and I had a lot of fun doing that list, and I've wanted to do one on movies for quite some time, so I figured I would do it now, kind of fittingly honestly, to go along with the other video. So without further ado, let's get into this. So for the year 2002, my favorite movie is Catch Me If You Can. Now this is a Steven Spielberg film, probably one of the better ones he's made in the last 2 decades, I'd say. I think it's a very entertaining movie. You have Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks in the lead role, and the idea of the film is basically that Leonardo DiCaprio is this con man who has, faked being a pilot, faked being a doctor, and all these other things, and he's been doing check fraud and whatnot, and you have Tom Hanks, who is this FBI agent who's going after him, and it's a pretty fun cat and mouse type movie. It's actually a true story. I'm sure they took some liberties because some of this stuff is pretty far-fetched, but it's a very entertaining movie, pretty fast-paced, and one that I really enjoy. So Catch Me If You Can is my favorite movie of 2002. Moving on to the year 2003, we have Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, the third and final installment in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think this movie is a fantastic film. I love the Lord of the Rings films in general. I think they're all great. I think the weakest is Two Towers. I think the strongest is Fellowship of the Ring, but I still love Return of the King. This is an awesome movie. It's extremely long. It's like 3 hours and 20 minutes if you're watching the theatrical edition, and then 4 hours and 10, I think, if you're watching the extended. I actually just watched the extended for the first time when the 4Ks were released, and it definitely adds some needed content. There's one character's death scene that was removed from the theatrical cut. I don't understand why they did that, but it's a great movie. I mean, it's super epic. It's definitely the largest scale out of the 3 movies because a lot of this film is just a ton of big battle sequences, and they're some of the best battle sequences in the entire trilogy. So it's a really epic conclusion. It's got a pretty emotional ending in my opinion. I've always found the end pretty sad, but it's bittersweet, I guess you could say, because it's still good at the same time. And yeah, overall, just an awesome end to this trilogy. And it's also tied with Titanic for winning the most Oscars of all time with 11. Alright, moving on to the year 2004, this one was a bit tough for me, but I decided to go with Shaun of the Dead, which is also one of my brother's favorite movies. This is a film that we have watched many times together. It's a very quotable movie. It's a very funny film as well. This is directed by Edgar Wright. This is a zombie movie. It's not a serious one. It is much more a comedy. If you guys know Edgar Wright, then you'll kind of know what to expect from this film. And this is a hilarious, slapstick zombie comedy film. I love the main 2 characters in this. Particularly I love Ed, who I just think is hilarious in this movie. But yeah, I really like the 2 main characters. The comedy is fantastic. Like I said, there's a ton of funny moments and great writing. I really like the British humor that's present in this movie. And there's also there's still some good gory zombie content. It doesn't shy away from that kind of stuff. There's still some great over-the-top kills, and it's just a really fun movie. And yeah, I have a lot of enjoyment with it. The honorable mention I wanted to give really quickly is for The Aviator. It's a Martin Scorsese film. I think it's one of his more underrated flicks, and again, one of his better flicks, I'd say, in the last 2 decades or so. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's a true story about Howard Hughes, and it's a really interesting biopic. I was really into the movie. I really like the cinematography and the way it was stylized so that the colors fit whichever year the movie was set in, because it takes place over multiple decades. So when it's in the 20s, it would have the same coloring as movies did in the 20s when they added color in post-production. Obviously they were black and white back then, but sometimes they had color, and it would have that same look. So there would be kind of blues rather than whites, and it was just really cool seeing that transition over time. I thought it was a very smart technique, and yeah, besides that, it's a great movie. Moving on to the year 2005, we have Batman Begins. I really wanted to talk about Revenge of the Sith. I do think that is the best Star Wars prequel by far, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars movies. But I had to go with Batman Begins because I think this is just the perfect, start of a trilogy, especially like a comic book wise. I think this is one of the best, if not the best, origin movies out there. Scratch that, it is the best comic book origin movie in my opinion, because most comic book films, when it comes to characters, origin stories, they don't take too long for the character to kind of become the superhero, right? It's usually in the first 40 minutes or so. Batman doesn't actually wear his outfit until an hour and something into this movie, so it does take a little bit longer, but everything leading up to that I think is so well executed. This is the first time, and really only time on the big big screen we've ever actually seen a origin story for Batman, kind of seeing what Bruce Wayne did, how he became this crime fighter. So we get all that backstory here, and it's really well told. I like the pacing of this movie and the way it's put together, kind of fitting with Christopher Nolan's style. It's a little bit out of order and whatnot, so that's kind of cool. I think it keeps you more engaged, I would say, than if it was just done in a linear fashion. And yeah, I mean, otherwise, I think Christian Bale is great as Bruce Wayne / Batman. He's my personal favorite actor to play the role. I absolutely love Alfred in this movie. I think this is my favorite, portrayal of Alfred of all time, and in any of the Dark Knight movies, I really, really like Michael Caine in this film. And the entire cast, I mean, Commissioner Gordon, that perfect casting. I could not think of anybody better than Gary Oldman. He looks the part, and he's just incredible in the role. And from a villain standpoint, I really like Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul. I think he's a great villain. And this is a trilogy filled with great villains, so he really stands out in my opinion, and among other comic book movies. And I even like Scarecrow as well. I really like him as kind of a smaller side villain. So awesome film overall, and definitely one of my favorite comic book movies ever made. Moving on to the year 2006, we have The Departed. Now, this is one of my brother and I's favorite movies to watch together. We've watched it many times. It's a very quotable movie for the both of us. And this is my personal favorite Martin Scorsese film. I love this movie. It was kind of him going back somewhat to his mafia gangster type films. The big difference here was that a lot of the other ones, they were, focused on, Italian mafia or whatnot. This one is in Boston, so it's quite different. It's like Irish people, and I think it's great, honestly. I mean, it's a very, very enjoyable film. I love all the performances in it. I think Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio are great. Jack Nicholson steals the show for me, though. I mean, he's got so many hilarious scenes. But even like Martin Sheen, Mark Wahlberg, like everybody in this movie is great across the board. I really like the story, kind of like the two people, one police officer who is, undercover and, kind of sneaking his way into like this crime group, and then a criminal who is a police officer who is kind of getting info on the police. So I kind of like that dynamic. And also the role reversal. Normally you think Matt Damon would be kind of the good cop and Leo would be the bad one, but it's the opposite, and I think that was kind of smart. All that stuff is just really enjoyable. It's a very entertaining movie. It's quite funny, honestly. There's a lot of really great, memorable lines here. Like I said, this is an extremely quotable movie for my brother and I. And there's so many scenes in this film. I shouldn't say there's so many, but there's a few scenes in this movie that are very random and don't really need to be in the movie, but I'm glad they're in there because they're just hilarious, and honestly, I just think they're some of the best parts of the movie. But yeah, it's a very entertaining movie overall. So if you guys have not seen The Departed, highly recommend it. It's a movie that I show to most of my friends, and everybody is always shocked at the end because there's some pretty crazy stuff that goes down. But yeah, great film. Alright, moving on to the year 2007, I was originally going to go with No Country for Old Men, which I actually rewatched for a third time a couple weeks ago, but I ended up watching a movie called There Will Be Blood, which I talked about on the second episode of my podcast with Aiden, and I really, really enjoyed this film. So I'm actually going to go with There Will Be Blood. I think this is by far my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson film. I haven't really seen too many of his movies. I've only seen two others so far. Those being Magnolia and Boogie Nights, neither of which I was really a huge fan of, to be honest. I would say I prefer Magnolia over Boogie Nights, but There Will Be Blood is definitely on a whole other level than those two films, in my opinion. I just think this film was super interesting from start to finish. I, first of all, think Daniel Day-Lewis is fantastic in this movie. He gives, an incredible performance, one of the best I've seen of all time, to be honest. He's just excellent in this movie. And it's a film that you don't really think it would be super interesting, judging by like the story, because it's just about a oil guy who becomes wealthy and kind of tricks this town, but it's honestly really investing. I got really into it. I think the movie is very well made. I love the first 20 minutes, how there's no dialogue. It's just all kind of setting up things visually, and you can tell what's going on. The score for the movie is great, in my opinion. It's very well shot, like I said. So just a very interesting movie with great performances. Paul Dano also, I mean, he's great in this movie as Eli. So yeah, great movie all around. Moving on to the year 2008, a very easy pick for me, we have The Dark Knight. This is the best comic book movie of all time, hands down, in my opinion. This is such a masterpiece, and it gets talked about so much, even today. People still talk about The Dark Knight all the time. It's just that good of a movie. Obviously, I mean, you can't talk about this movie without discussing Heath Ledger as the Joker. He makes this movie, right? Like, this is, in my opinion, one of the best performances of all time. He is just incredible in this. By far, in my opinion, the best movie villain of all time. I think he's just incredible in this movie. There's so much fantastic writing and scenes between him and Batman. I particularly love the interrogation scene. That is probably the highlight of this movie for me from Heath Ledger's performance. So there's just so many moments like that that are great. Hans Zimmer's score, I forgot to mention that with Batman Begins, but it's great here. I really, really like it. I absolutely love, just the pacing of the movie and just the story and whatnot, right? I think it's very smart, especially the final act, just the way things go down with Harvey Dent and whatnot. I think it's a very, very smart comic book movie, and I just love the way the story goes. It also has my favorite opening to any film of all time. I absolutely love the opening bank scene, and I love the ending as well. So all around, from start to finish, like I said, it's a masterpiece. There's nothing that dips ever for me. It is perfect consistently throughout the movie, and I love it to death. Moving on to the year 2009, we have Inglourious Basterds. This is my personal favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. It's probably my brother's favorite as well. This is just an awesome movie. I mean, I love the World War II setting. I love the humor in this movie and just what it's about. You have, a great cast. The standout here, though, is by far Christoph Waltz as Hans Landa, who is, again, one of the best villains of all time, in my opinion. The opening scene in France, the milk scene, is so tense. It's so well written. It's just an amazing opening, and that tense feeling and that great dialogue, it doesn't just stop there. There's a lot of other scenes that really stand out for me. I love the bar scene between Hugo Stiglitz and all the other characters. That was great. There's a lot of tension there as well, and just some very funny moments. Like I said, Tarantino's fantastic when it comes to writing dialogue and whatnot. He's very good at incorporating humor into his movies. One of the funniest scenes in this film, in my opinion, is if not the funniest, is when Hans Landa is kind of talking to Lieutenant Aldo Rain and his other companions, and they clearly aren't Italian, but it's just the way the whole scene was done. It's just hilarious. So I love that so much. And yeah, it's just a great movie. I like I said, I love the way they handle it, story-wise, just kind of a few different stories they're all connected in the end, but it's just very interesting, and yeah, I love this movie. Alright, moving on to the year 2010, we have Inception, another Christopher Nolan movie to make its way onto my list, and not the last. This is, again, another masterpiece. I think Christopher Nolan makes so many great movies. This is probably his, technically speaking, I'd say his best original movie. It has a really in-depth world to it for a film that isn't based on any previous subject matter. It's just very, very original and very intriguing, because you have this whole, dreams within dreams within dreams, whatever. And I mean, there's some people who say the movie's confusing. I can see why it would be, but I think, it's a movie where, I've seen it so many times now where I understand it overall, and there's little minor things I pick up on each time that honestly enhance the viewing every single time. So this is one of those movies that, for me, gets better with each watch. It's not just the first watch is the best and then it kind of goes downhill from there. I think it gets increasingly better each time, and that's what I love about some of Christopher Nolan's movies, is the way that they're made so that they are more enjoyable on rewatch. So yeah, Inception, great. It has some of the best visuals of all time. Obviously, I think one of the most memorable shots of the 2010s and of all time, and honestly, cinema history, is that shot of the city bending. That is such an amazing shot. I love it so much. So lots of great stuff here. I love the performances from everybody. I think this has some great characters. I love the emotional core that the movie has with Cobb trying to get back to his kids. And just the wife that he had, Maul, who died, and the way they handle that and whatnot. It's all very, very well done, so it's an excellent movie from start to finish. Moving on to the year 2011, this was kind of a funny year for me going into this list because I've had this list created for a while, and it gets updated every once in a while because I might watch some more movies I hadn't seen yet, but this was always a very hard year for me. Originally, I was going to put, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. I do think that's a great Harry Potter movie, but I was like, maybe there's something else out there. So then I considered Super 8, which is my favorite J.J. Abrams movie, but I don't know, I wasn't really feeling that 100%, because it's a good movie, but I just don't know if I would call it, worthy of being my favorite of that year. Then I looked at Rise of the Planet of the Apes, same situation. I like it, just not necessarily worthy of that. The Help, again, same thing. And then I watched a movie called Warrior, which just by far took the spot for my favorite movie of 2011. This is an excellent movie. It's directed by Gavin O'Connor, who also made The Way Back, starring Ben Affleck, which came out last year. I really liked that movie, and again, I am a very big fan of this film, Warrior. It was great from start to finish. It's not a true story, but it is a story about these two brothers who kind of go into fighting. One of them was an ex-military. One I think grew up being a fighter. So they both go into the MMA. They eventually have to fight each other. But yeah, their father was an alcoholic. He was played by Nick Nolte, who I think gives a fantastic performance in this movie. He was nominated for an Oscar. I think he deserved it easily. He was just great in this movie. And the two leads, I mean, you have Tom Hardy and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name, Joel Edgerton, and the two of them, they just work so well together. There's a lot of tension in this movie. The MMA scenes are so well put together. Like, they're very brutal. I'll be honest, this is like probably my favorite boxing or MMA or whatever you want to call it, fighting movie out there, because I'm not a very big fan of Rocky. I've kind of talked about this in the past. I just don't really find that movie that great. So I was really into Warrior, and yeah, I think if you guys haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching it. There is, some cliche stuff, some kind of like stereotypical things for this genre, but again, I just think the way it's put together, the kind of grittiness that the movie has, and the direction it goes, very good. Similar to The Way Back, these characters, there's very realistic consequences for their actions and the kind of people they are, and I really like that about it. Alright, moving on to the year 2012. This was a tough one for me because there are two movies this year that I absolutely love. And it really came down to Django Unchained and Dark Knight Rises. I want to mention Skyfall really quickly. I think that's one of the best Bond films in existence. I don't quite like it as much as the other two movies, but yeah, this one was tough because I think the better film overall are these two is Django Unchained. But I probably, just personally love Dark Knight Rises more, because I think Dark Knight Rises, well, it does have problems. For me, it is a great conclusion to what I consider the best trilogy of all time. I absolutely love the villain. I think Bane is great. I think he's underappreciated, honestly, because obviously they weren't going to be able to live up to the Joker, but I think Bane is just excellent in that movie, having a real physical threat for Batman, which is something we hadn't experienced in that trilogy. I think it's definitely the best film for Bruce as a character because it's so focused on him. It's like not really a character study, but it's about him kind of getting over Harvey Dent's death, kind of rising back from that, and then also literally rising out of this pit, which I think is the best scene in the entire trilogy and one of my favorite movie scenes of all time. So there's so many great moments in this film. Yes, there's some stuff I don't love in it. I'm not a huge fan of one of the characters. Played by Marion Cotillard. I don't really like her in this movie, honestly. But all in all, like I said, I think the ending here is probably one of my favorite endings of all time, if not my favorite. I think it's just, like I said, the best ending they could have easily come up with for this film. I love it so much. It has my favorite score out of the trilogy as well, so there's a lot of elements I love. And with Django, on the other hand, I think that's just such an entertaining movie. I don't quite love Django as much as, Inglourious Basterds, but it's probably my second favorite Tarantino movie. I think one of the things that kind of holds us back is I don't really care too much for Django as a character. I find the other characters more interesting personally. Like, I really, really like Christoph Waltz in that movie. I think Leo is a great villain. So that's an excellent movie as well. I love the over-the-top violence in that movie, but again, I think I'd have to go with Dark Knight Rises, honestly, as my personal favorite movie. Alright, and moving on to the year 2013, we have The Wolf of Wall Street. Initially, I was going to go with Prisoners, and I thought that was kind of my locked in for my favorite of that year. But when I rewatched it, I didn't enjoy Prisoners as much, and that's kind of normal for films like that, where it's about mystery and finding out who's doing this thing. Because once you know it, it's still an enjoyable movie because it has great performances and whatnot, but it does hold it back a little bit from being as good as the first viewing. Whereas Wolf of Wall Street is just such an entertaining movie. I think this is by far Scorsese's funniest movie to date. It is a hilarious movie from start to finish. I watched it with my friend Aiden, and we were laughing the entire experience. It's just a great movie. Lots of sex, drugs, and etc. But yeah, it's a very fun movie. I love the performances here. I think Leo was great. I really, really liked Jonah Hill in this movie. There were some hilarious scenes with him. So it's just a very fun and entertaining movie from start to finish. Like I said, one of Tarantino's, or I don't know why I said Tarantino, one of Scorsese's funniest movies to date, and well, definitely his funniest movie to date, I would say, and one of his most well-paced I found, because it's a 3-hour movie, and it really doesn't feel like it, honestly. It goes by very fast. Alright, going on to the year 2014, probably my favorite movie of all time, honestly, is Interstellar. This is my favorite Christopher Nolan movie by far. I did a ranking of his movies when Tenet came out, and this was number 1. This is just, this is kind of the movie that I remember seeing in theaters, and it didn't really change the way I looked at film or anything, but I just remember there was just something I felt while watching this movie that I never felt with another movie in my entire life, and I still have that feeling that feeling to this day whenever I watch this movie, every single time I view it. I don't know, I find it so interesting on a character level, on an emotional level. I can connect to it because it's a story about a father trying to get home to his kids, which is something I can relate to. I am not a father, but my parents are both in the military and they've gone overseas before for long periods of time, and I don't necessarily know if it was just that reason that I connected to this movie, but yeah, I just think the story is so interesting and so engaging on an emotional level. I mean, like, yes, this is not the only Nolan film about a guy trying to get home to his kids, right? Prestige kind of had that, Inception had that, but this one definitely handles it the most. This film, at its core, it's about, right, like, if I were to explain the plot for this movie, I would say it's about a guy trying to get home to his kids. Yes, it's set in space and stuff, but that stuff is almost secondary to what this film was about on an emotional level, and that's what I love about it. On top of that, the space stuff is obviously amazing. The cinematography is incredible here. The visual effects are some of the best I've seen of all time. That wormhole scene in particular is just amazing. So there's so many great moments. I love, Matthew McConaughey in the lead role. I think he's great in this movie. I think it's a extremely underrated Nolan film, right? Because a lot of the time this is pretty low on his list. I feel the same way about Dark Knight Rises. I think that's underrated, but yeah, this is so low on his list. Usually, a lot of people complain about the third act. I can understand people's issues with the ending of this movie. Just the whole Tesseract scene is a bit weird, but and I see so many complaints about the movie's deeper meaning being like, oh, love transcends space and time. Like, it works for me because, like I said, I can connect to the movie on an emotional level, so I kind of feel it, and so I'm completely fine with the direction it goes in, and I honestly love it. So yeah, incredible movie. Like I said, my favorite movie of all time, probably, and it's just a masterpiece. Alright, moving on to the year 2015, we have Star Wars The Force Awakens. This one, it hurts because I think this is a great movie, right? On its own, I think this is such a fun film. But, the trilogy goes nowhere, honestly. I think the sequel trilogy is one of the most disappointing things of all time, cinematic-wise for me, right? I think it's worse than the prequel trilogy by a long shot. I actually like the prequels quite a bit because they had a story that they stuck to, where the sequels just had no idea what the heck they were doing. There was no plan, and if there even was a plan, they scrapped it, right? Because Rise of Skywalker just absolutely ruined everything that this trilogy could have been. I don't think Last Jedi is the low point, honestly. I think that is a decent movie. I think it's an alright Star Wars film that has some great stuff. I love the dynamic between Rey, Luke, Kylo, and Snoke in that movie. All of the scenes with them, I think, are great. It's just everything else is kind of eh. But Rise of Skywalker is the one that really screws up this trilogy, in my opinion. But anyways, that being said, Force Awakens, I think this is a very, very fun film. I have a lot of fun with it. I think it's very well paced. It goes by very quickly, right? It doesn't slow down a lot. It's not like The Last Jedi, where it's a bit slow at times. It's not like Rise of Skywalker, it's just way too fast. This movie is the perfect pacing, right? It's enough where you still get story for the characters and whatnot, but you also just get exciting, kind of quick-moving plot at the same time. So it's a very well-made movie, in my opinion. Yes, the story is very similar to A New Hope's, and I can understand that complaint. I feel the same way. But, I don't know. I still feel like, the new characters add enough to differentiate it from A New Hope to where I just don't really care, right? Like, I really liked Rey in this movie. I know she's a bit overpowered, and they don't really explain that stuff very well, but I think Daisy Ridley's so charismatic in this movie. I think this is her best performance out of the three movies. John Boyega is Finn, a great character in this movie. I love the idea behind him, but he goes nowhere in this trilogy. Adam Driver is definitely the high point of the entire trilogy. He's the one character who, in my opinion, stayed consistent throughout all three, and I think he's just an amazing actor. He gives a great performance. Yeah, so love him as a villain. He's probably like my second favorite Star Wars villain, to be honest. I think he's underrated. Han Solo, as kind of like the main returning character focus on this movie. I really like Harrison Ford. I think he does a good job in this role. I think the movie nails the Star Wars humor, right? It's very Star Warsy feeling. I think Last Jedi has awful humor, and I think Rise of Skywalker's humor just doesn't, it's kind of stupid. But this movie, nails the humor. There's a lot of really great lines here. So, yeah, Force Awakens, all around, really enjoy this movie on its own. But sadly, the trilogy goes nowhere. Moving on to the year 2016, we have 10 Cloverfield Lane. This is a really interesting film, and I highly recommend you guys watch it. If you have not seen the original Cloverfield, I like that film quite a bit as well. That one it's basically like a found footage film, and I'm not really into those types of movies, but Cloverfield is actually a found footage film that I can rewatch. I have quite a bit of fun with it. I think it's really interesting. But 10 Cloverfield Lane is just on a whole nother level. They're very different movies, right? The other one is more of a sci-fi alien invasion type film, whereas Cloverfield, it's literally three people in a bunker the entire time. One guy's crazy. He thinks that the outside world has, poison gas and stuff, and that there's aliens invading. And that's not something that ever really comes into the movie until like the last 15 minutes or so. But everything leading up to that is just phenomenal, right? I think John Goodman gives such a great performance here. He steals the show, in my opinion, easily. But everybody else, I mean, there's only really the other two characters, but Mary Elizabeth Winstead is great. I really like the other guy, John John Galligan Jr. I really think he's really good in this movie. So yeah, everybody in this film is great, and it's just very well written for a movie that is about, like I said, 3 characters stuck in a bunker. It's quite interesting in my opinion. Very well written, and it just keeps you on the seat. I kind of feel like rewatching it, honestly, because it's been quite some time. But yeah, awesome movie. Highly recommend watching it. Moving on to the year 2017. Initially, back in 2017, my favorite was It. I still like It a lot, but not as much. And then I kind of transitioned over to Blade Runner 2049, which I've rewatched a few times, and that's a movie that I just honestly don't enjoy on rewatch. It's very slow, and I don't really think there's anything to keep me super engaged because I know the direction the story goes and whatnot. I know the mystery and everything that happens. It is a beautiful movie. It's one of the most well-shot films I've ever seen, but I just I don't really find myself enjoying it on rewatch. So I actually am going with Dunkirk, which I think is highly, highly underrated. I think this is one of the best war films in existence, honestly. It's my second favorite, right behind Saving Private Ryan. I think this is an excellent movie. I hear a lot of people complain about it. Some people really don't like that the characters don't have much depth in them. There's not really any story with them whatsoever. And I can understand that complaint. My biggest complaint, honestly, when I first watched it was that it wasn't R, right? Like, I kind of felt like it could have utilized the war a bit more to make it a bit more brutal. But honestly, like, when I watch it now, I just don't care. I think it's so well put together. I mean, okay, I can understand, not really caring about the characters in this movie, but I think there's no denying how well this movie's put together. I mean, it has gorgeous cinematography, one of the most well-shot films in my opinion. I absolutely love the shots of the cameras mounted onto the planes. That's awesome. The colors and everything are just beautiful. There's so many amazing aerial shots and whatnot. But this film does an incredible job at building up tension and suspense. It is just perfectly edited. I cannot talk enough. As someone who is very into editing, I cannot talk enough about how well this movie is edited. I mean, the way they cut between all of these different sequences, it is just amazing in my opinion. I really love the way the film's story is told, where it's kind of 3 different perspectives, each is a different length of time. But like I said, the way this movie is edited, the way the music works, right, with that ticking clock sound constantly throughout the film, it keeps you on edge, and it's just very interesting. On top of that, I think the movie has amazing sound design. It is super loud. I remember seeing this in theaters, and when the planes flew over, people covered their ears. It was so loud, but it just made it such an amazing, immersive experience. That's really how to explain this movie. It's an experience, and yeah, so I gotta be honest, very underrated movie in my opinion. I can understand people not liking the characters, but I don't know. I just find it, as a film, it is just masterful the way it's put together. Alright, moving on to the year 2018, we have Mission Impossible Fallout. I think this is a great film. I'm not really the biggest fan of the Mission Impossible movies. I enjoy them quite a bit. But, this is a movie I went into knowing it had great reviews, which kind of surprised me. And coming out of it, I was blown away. I felt like I had just witnessed one of the best action movies of all time, which is honestly how to explain this movie. I think this is one of the best action movies ever made. Yeah, the story is pretty simple. It's literally just to save the world from a nuclear threat. But the action sequences and the pacing. The action sequences are just amazing. I mean, the hand-to-hand combat, the choreography is just phenomenal. There's that one scene in the bathroom that is just great. You have the amazing helicopter chase at the end of the movie, which looks amazing, by the way, especially like on a 4K TV because of the IMAX shots. It's so great looking. All that stuff, right? It's just so well put together. So it's a very high-octane action movie that I just love to death. And so, yeah. Great movie. I'm looking forward to the 7th one quite a bit. And yeah, I also think Henry Cavill is a very good villain in this movie. But yeah, definitely one of the best action movies in the last while. Alright, moving on to the year 2019. When I did my list last year, I put Joker as number 1, but I've seen Joker, I think 4 or 5 times now, and I think I've kind of overwatched it. I think I've seen it too many times in such a short amount of, like, a short time span, right? I think I watched it like 3 times in like 2 weeks once. I think I've just seen it too many times at this point. I think I need to kind of just wait a while before I watch it again. And honestly, it's not even my favorite movie of 2019 anymore. The Lighthouse is. The Lighthouse is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's probably my second favorite. This is just everything I love about horror. Now, I'm not a very big A24 fan, to be honest. It's not that I dislike all of their movies. They have some movies I love. I think Good Time with Robert Pattinson is great. I think Uncut Gems is great. Right? They have some great movies out there. I'm just not the biggest fan of their horror movies, to be honest. They definitely give their directors complete creative freedom, and that's a good thing, but a lot of the time I find them a little bit long, kind of boring, to be completely honest. I was not a fan of Hereditary, that's just me. But The Lighthouse, it's interesting how much I actually like this movie, despite not really caring for any of the other A24 horror films. I think this is a masterpiece. I mean, from start to finish, this movie is just, it completely grabbed me, right? I mean, it's just such an interesting movie. I think, the two lead actors, the only two actors in this movie, really, Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, are excellent together. They work so well in this movie. I love them. They're fantastic here. But atmospheric-wise and everything, just the way the movie's made, I mean, I love horror movies that are kind of like a small group of characters stuck on an isolated area, kind of going crazy all the time. That's why Shining's my favorite, right? Kind of similar movies in that sense. I love the location of like the island with the lighthouse. It's very eerie, and this movie, everything from a filmmaking standpoint completely complements what it's about, right? The cinematography, right? The black and white style with the black bars on the side. It's great. The shots, they're all so well done. A lot of them are very long. It's very eerie. The score, in my opinion, is phenomenal. It fits the movie so well. It's one of my favorite scores of 2019. It's so eerie, and it just works extremely well with the movie. The sound design, the sound of the lighthouse, right? Everything here is just great. So I think this is like a friggin' fantastic movie. The first time I watched it, the only thing that really held it back from being a 10 for me was the ending, because I'm not really into this kind of endings where it's like, okay, we have no idea what happened. But when I watched it a second time, there was one line that a character said that gave me an entire theory, and I guess I'll go over that theory right now. My theory is that, okay, so Robert Pattinson's character and Willem Dafoe's character both have the same name. They're both named Thomas, and there's one line where where Willem Dafoe's character says, "Do you seek salvation in the light?" And the biblical meaning of salvation is like deliverance from sin, brought by Jesus Christ, right? And so that one line just changed the way I interpreted the movie. I was thinking, okay, wait, so what if because we know that Robert Pattinson was responsible for this death, for the death of this guy in Canada, and he's trying to get away from that. He's trying to run away. So what if he, is trying to run away from his past and seek forgiveness, and Willem Dafoe is an older version of him who has been forgiven, right? Because he goes up in the lighthouse all the time. He's always up there, and Robert Pattinson's always on the ground, kind of jealous. He wants to be up there. He wants to see the light. He wants to be forgiven for what he's done. And at the end of the movie, he gets up to the light finally, and he dies. He just immediately falls down the stairs, and then the last shot of the movie is him on a very small rock having his stomach eaten by seagulls, right? So he was never even on a lighthouse island. So I was thinking, okay, so what if this movie's all in his head, and he's a person who wants to be forgiven for what he did, but he isn't forgiven, and he's left to die. Anyways, that's my theory. That's the way I look at this movie now, and that completely changed the way I viewed it, and I love that now. So it's pretty much one of my favorite horror movies of all time now, just because of the way I looked at that ending. And I'm not a religious person whatsoever, by the way, but that's just, kind of things I threw together. Alright, so moving on to 2020, the last year on this list, is Tenet. I did my 2020 list a few weeks ago, and yeah, this is my favorite movie of 2020. It's not my personal favorite Nolan film. It's somewhere in the middle, I'd say, in my ranking, but I do think it's an extremely enjoyable film. What it kind of lacks for me is the emotional core that I think are present in a lot of his other movies, right? Inception has one, Interstellar has a huge one, even Dunkirk, to some minor degree, I do think has a little bit of a core to it. Not so much necessarily just like, oh, I care about the characters, but there is something there in my opinion. Tenet, not really, but I do think this is Nolan's best action to date, right? I think it's extremely well choreographed. All the fight sequences are really good in my opinion and very interesting, especially having to shoot them twice and kind of do them reversed and whatnot. The plane sequence is great. The final act is amazing. Right, there's so many awesome action sequences in this movie, so very, very entertaining from start to finish. I like the performances from everybody here. Again, I don't care about the characters too much, but I do like all of them. I do think they give very good performances, and it's just a very, very entertaining movie. So there you go, guys. Those are my favorite movies of every single year that I've been alive. This video was quite long, just like the video game one I did last night, but I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever. But I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.